Doris Day was once the very picture of American innocence, the golden-haired beauty whose smile could light up the silver screen. For millions, she was America's sweetheart, the woman who made the world sing along to cue Sera, and who seemed to embody everything pure, cheerful, and unshakably optimistic. On screen, she was the perfect girl next door, the loving wife, the romantic dream every man wanted and every woman admired. Her voice, soft and warm, carried a promise of comfort in uncertain times, and her roles in romantic comedies and musicals made audiences believe in happy endings. To her fans, Doris Day was not just a star, she was hope wrapped in sunshine. But behind that carefully maintained image was a woman carrying burdens few ever saw. The Hollywood smile concealed deep scars from accidents, heartbreak from failed marriages, betrayal from those she trusted most, and the kind of loneliness that fame could never heal. Her life was far more complicated than the bright, wholesome image projected by the studios that built her into an icon. While the world adored her as the eternal optimist, Doris herself lived through trials that tested her spirit again and again. And yet, in spite of it all, she never allowed bitterness to overshadow her light. The truth is, Doris Day's story is not simply one of Hollywood glamour, it is a story of resilience. She was a woman who endured devastating personal setbacks, who rebuilt her life after financial ruin, who survived heartbreak in love more than once, and who ultimately devoted herself to a cause greater than fame or fortune. To understand Doris Day is to peel back the polished image of a smiling starlet and uncover the real human being beneath it all. She was more than her songs, more than her films, and more than the sweet innocence the studios carefully packaged for the world to consume. So who was Doris Day, really? What secrets lay beneath the surface of the woman who charmed generations with her warmth and optimism? How did she reconcile the public's adoration with the private battles she fought so quietly? Her life was not a fairy tale, but a story shaped by 8 shocking truths about the accident that changed her destiny, the love affairs that ended in heartbreak, the betrayal that nearly destroyed her, the fears she carried as a mother, and the quiet strength that led her to dedicate her later years to protecting the most vulnerable. In this journey, we will go beyond the songs, beyond the laughter, and beyond the golden glow of Hollywood to uncover the Doris Day few truly knew. The image may have been crafted in Technicolor, but the woman herself was far more complex, fragile and strong, broken and resilient, hidden yet unforgettable. These are the secrets Doris Day carried through her extraordinary life, and together, they reveal the real story of a legend who was so much more than America's sweetheart. In her teenage years, Doris Mary Kappelhoff was filled with the dreams and determination of any ambitious young girl. Born in Cincinnati, Ohio, to a family of German-American roots, she showed an early fascination with performance. Her first love wasn't singing, it was dancing. She spent hours practicing with natural grace, moving to rhythms with a spark that hinted at a promising career. Doris believed her future would be on stage as a professional dancer, and she was well on her way to chasing that dream. Her talent was undeniable, and plans were already in motion for her to continue training and eventually take her skills to Los Angeles, where the world of entertainment awaited. But fate intervened in the most tragic way. On October 13, 1937, when she was just 15 years old, Doris was riding in a car with friends when disaster struck. Their vehicle collided with a train, leaving her with serious injuries. Her right leg was badly shattered, and doctors told her the devastating news: her dancing career was over before it had even begun. The young girl who had poured her heart into movement was suddenly confined to a hospital bed, facing months of painful recovery. For Doris, it felt like her entire future had been ripped away in an instant. This accident was not just physically life-changing, it was emotionally crushing. Imagine being a teenager, standing on the edge of your dreams, only to watch them collapse in a single moment of tragedy. For Doris, the injury left a scar far deeper than the physical pain. It forced her to rebuild her identity from the ground up. Friends and family encouraged her to stay strong, but privately, she wrestled with sadness and uncertainty about what she would do with her life now that dance was no longer an option. Yet, from the depths of despair, something unexpected began to emerge. During her long months of recovery, Doris turned to music. She would sit by the radio and sing along to her favorite songs, discovering that her voice had a warmth and clarity that moved people. Singing began as a way to fill the silence of her convalescence, but it soon became her new passion. What started as a coping mechanism slowly grew into a calling. Doris began to train her voice seriously, and within a few years, she was performing locally, drawing attention to a talent that might otherwise have never been discovered. What few knew throughout her career, however, was that the ever-cheerful Doris Day carried the memory of that accident with her for the rest of her life. To her fans, she seemed endlessly optimistic, embodying sunshine and joy. But behind the smile, there remained the shadow of a lost dream, the pain of a teenage girl whose future had been rewritten by tragedy. The world would eventually come to know her as a singer and actress, but in her heart, Doris never forgot the dancer she might have been. This was the first secret Doris carried, that her journey into music and film began not with triumph, but with heartbreak. Her fans saw a star born out of light, but Doris knew the truth. Her path had been forged from the ashes of shattered dreams and the resilience to find beauty in the midst of loss. For all the sweetness and optimism that Doris Day projected on screen, her personal life behind closed doors was a stark contrast. In Hollywood, she was adored as the wholesome girl next door, the perfect wife, the picture of domestic happiness. Yet in her own marriages, Doris endured heartbreak, betrayal, and even control that suffocated her freedom. The irony was almost cruel. The woman who became famous for embodying love and stability on film struggled again and again to find it in her own life. Her first marriage came when she was just 17 years old, to trombonist Al Jordan, whom she had met while working with Barney Rapp's band in Cincinnati. At first, Doris believed she was marrying for love, but the reality was far darker. Jordan was jealous, controlling, and physically abusive. He distrusted her interactions with other men in the music business and became increasingly violent. Doris gave birth to their son, Terry, in 1942, but the marriage quickly collapsed under the weight of Jordan's cruelty. Doris would later describe this chapter of her life with pain, admitting that she had endured things no young woman should ever face in what was supposed to be the safety of marriage. Hoping for a fresh start, Doris married again in 1946 to saxophonist George Weidler. At first, the marriage seemed promising. Weidler was closer to her age, and both shared a love of music. But this union, too, was short-lived. He was unfaithful and distant, and by 1949, they had divorced. Once again, Doris found herself a single mother, focused on raising Terry and throwing herself into her growing singing career to keep moving forward. It was her third marriage, however, that would shape much of her career and much of her pain. In 1951, Doris married Martin Melcher, a film producer who quickly took control of not only her personal life but also her professional decisions. For nearly 2 decades, Melcher managed Doris's career with an iron hand, often signing contracts and making choices without her knowledge or consent. On the surface, their partnership looked like a successful union. He pushed her into projects that kept her at the top of Hollywood's box office lists, and she became one of the most bankable stars in the world during the 1950s and 1960s. But behind closed doors, Doris felt more like an employee than a wife. Melcher dictated much of what she did, leaving her with little independence. Still, Doris remained committed to the image the public expected of her. She played the devoted wife and doting mother on screen while living in a household where her freedom was restricted and her finances were controlled. In interviews, she rarely spoke of her personal struggles, choosing instead to present the sunny image fans adored. It was only much later, after Melcher's death, that the full extent of his control and the financial ruin he left her in became known. Her fourth marriage, to restaurateur Barry Comden in 1976, was also unhappy. Though it began with charm, it too ended in divorce in 1981, with Doris retreating further into a life away from the spotlight. By then, she had endured 4 marriages, none of which brought her the lasting happiness she deserved. The secret Doris carried throughout her career was that while audiences celebrated her as the epitome of romantic comedy and marital bliss, her own experience with love was scarred by betrayal, abuse, and disappointment. She had lived through controlling husbands, broken trust, and the deep loneliness of being misunderstood. Off-screen, the perfect housewife was only a role she played. In reality, Doris Day was a woman constantly searching for the kind of love she so effortlessly created in Hollywood fantasies, but rarely found in her own world. In 1968, Doris Day's life was turned upside down in a way she never could have imagined. For nearly 2 decades, her third husband, Martin Melcher, had managed her career. To the outside world, he was the man guiding Hollywood's brightest female star, signing her to films, arranging contracts, and building her reputation as a box office powerhouse. But when Melcher died suddenly of heart failure at just 52, Doris discovered the devastating truth: the man she had trusted with her career and her finances had left her with nothing. The reality was staggering. Doris, who had spent years as one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood, who had starred in hit after hit and sold millions of records, was nearly broke. Melcher, together with his business partner Jerome Rosenthal, had squandered her fortune through bad investments, mismanagement, and reckless decisions that Doris had never even been consulted on. Contracts had been signed in her name without her knowledge, including long-term commitments that she would now be expected to fulfill. In one cruel twist of fate, the woman who had played America's happiest sweetheart was facing the kind of betrayal that could have destroyed her completely. Among the biggest shocks was learning that she was already contracted to star in a television series, The Doris Day Show. Doris had never agreed to it, never even wanted to do television. At that time, many Hollywood stars still saw television as a step down from the silver screen, and Doris had no plans to make the transition. But with her fortune gone and debts piling up, she had little choice. The contract was binding, and Doris, determined to protect her son and salvage what remained of her financial security, stepped into the world of television reluctantly but with characteristic professionalism. When The Doris Day Show premiered in 1968, audiences saw the same Doris they had always loved: charming, elegant, and filled with warmth. Few realized that behind the scenes, she was working to rebuild her life from scratch, doing a show she had been forced into by betrayal. The series ran for 5 successful seasons, and while Doris eventually came to terms with the new direction her career had taken, she never forgot the way she had been manipulated into it. The financial devastation led Doris to sue Jerome Rosenthal, beginning a long legal battle that stretched over years. Ultimately, she won a judgment worth millions, but the victory could not undo the years of stress, uncertainty, and heartbreak caused by the betrayal of someone she had trusted so deeply. To fans, Doris was still the bright star they had always adored, but in reality, she was a woman fighting to regain control over a life that had been stolen from her by those closest to her. The secret Doris carried was that her television career, something many associated with her continued success, had not been born of ambition or creativity. It had been born of desperation, forced upon her because of financial ruin she hadn't caused. Even the biggest star in the world could be left vulnerable when trust was misplaced. Doris Day's resilience in the face of such betrayal became one of the most defining and hidden truths of her extraordinary journey. By the late 1950s and into the 1960s, Doris Day had cemented her place as one of the brightest stars in Hollywood. For a record-setting run, she was consistently ranked as the #1 female box office star, beloved for her charm, her wholesome beauty, and her ability to light up any romantic comedy. Audiences adored her playful banter with Rock Hudson in Pillow Talk, laughed at her spirited performances in Lover Come Back and Send Me No Flowers, and saw her as the embodiment of sweetness and optimism. She was, in many ways, the perfect antidote to the turbulence of the era, an actress who gave people comfort and joy in uncertain times. But while the world saw Doris Day as the queen of light-hearted romantic comedies, the actress herself often felt trapped by the very image that made her famous. She longed to show a different side of her artistry, to prove she was capable of more than playing the cheerful girl next door or the quirky housewife. Beneath the sunny persona was a performer with depth, someone who yearned for the chance to explore complex characters in serious, dramatic roles. Doris knew she had the ability to stretch herself artistically, and she had glimpses of it during her career, but those opportunities were few and far between. One of her proudest achievements was Love Me or Leave Me in 1955, where she starred opposite James Cagney in a gritty musical drama based on the life of singer Ruth Etting. The role was demanding, far removed from the bubbly comedies she was known for, and it allowed Doris to show her range as both a singer and a dramatic actress. Critics praised her performance, and the film was a commercial success, proving that Doris could handle more than just light-hearted fare. Another highlight came in 1956, when Alfred Hitchcock cast her in The Man Who Knew Too Much, a suspense thriller where she played the mother of a kidnapped child. Not only did Doris hold her own in a Hitchcock thriller, but she also introduced the world to one of her most famous songs, Cue Sera, Sera, which went on to win the Academy Award for Best Original Song. Yet despite these successes, Doris found herself typecast. The studios knew that audiences adored her in romantic comedies, and those films made money, so they kept offering her similar roles. Year after year, she was placed in light comedies that relied on her charm, her smile, and her carefully crafted image as Hollywood's wholesome sweetheart. For Doris, it became increasingly frustrating. She wanted to push herself further, but Hollywood rarely gave her the chance. Behind the laughter and romance of her films was a woman who felt artistically constrained, boxed into roles that didn't reflect her full potential. The truth was that Doris Day carried this hidden battle quietly. She didn't complain publicly or lash out at the system that typecast her, but she knew her career could have taken a different shape if she had been allowed more freedom to choose. She longed for the kind of recognition actresses like Bette Davis or Katharine Hepburn enjoyed, but her path had been shaped by an industry more interested in preserving her perfect image than in exploring her depth as an actress. The secret Doris carried through her golden years in Hollywood was that, while audiences adored her sunny comedies, she often felt unfulfilled by them. She wanted to be remembered not just as America's sweetheart, but as a serious actress capable of tackling complex, dramatic roles. For all her success, Doris Day's career was also a story of missed opportunities, proof that even the brightest stars can feel dimmed by the very spotlight that made them famous. For Doris Day, her only son, Terry Melcher, was the center of her world. Born in 1942 during her first marriage to Al Jordan, Terry grew up surrounded by music and creativity. He inherited much of his mother's artistic spirit and eventually made a name for himself as a talented record producer and songwriter. By the 1960s, Terry was at the heart of Los Angeles' music scene, working with rising stars and carving out his own identity beyond his mother's fame. For Doris, seeing Terry succeed was both a source of pride and relief after years of personal heartbreak. Her son's success represented hope for a brighter future. But in 1969, Doris and Terry's lives were touched by a nightmare that nearly became tragedy. Terry was renting a house on Cielo Drive in Los Angeles, where he lived with his girlfriend, actress Candice Bergen. After moving out, the house was rented to director Roman Polanski and his wife, actress Sharon Tate. Not long after, that very house became the site of one of the most infamous crimes in American history, the Manson family murders. Charles Manson, who had been rejected by Terry in the music business, had originally targeted him, harboring resentment after Terry declined to sign him as a recording artist. Manson believed Terry still lived at the property, and when his followers struck on that August night, they brutally murdered Sharon Tate and several others. Though Terry had moved out before the massacre, the horrifying truth lingered: he had narrowly escaped death. Doris, who had always been protective of her son, was shaken to the core. The realization that Terry had been so close to becoming a victim left her in a state of quiet, lasting fear. Even though he survived, Doris carried with her the haunting thought of what might have been. Behind her calm demeanor, she was a mother terrified of how easily fate could have taken her only child. 4 years afterward, Terry continued to thrive professionally, producing music and working in television, but his relationship with his mother remained especially close. Doris's career had often been turbulent, and she leaned on Terry for strength and support in her later years, especially after the death of Martin Melcher and the financial betrayal she endured. Terry became not just her son, but her confidant and anchor. Then, in 2004, Doris faced the heartbreak she had feared for so long. Terry Melcher died at the age of 62 after a long battle with melanoma. For Doris, who had always kept her private life closely guarded, the loss was devastating. She rarely spoke publicly about her grief, but those who knew her understood that Terry's death left a wound she carried silently for the rest of her life. The bond between mother and son had been unshakable, and without him, Doris's world was never quite the same. The secret Doris kept was that behind her warm smile and cheerful presence, she lived with the profound pain of losing her only child. The world had seen her as the eternal optimist, but in her heart, Doris bore the private sorrow of a mother who had outlived the person she loved most. For all the glamour and success that defined her career, the loss of Terry was the chapter of her life that hurt the deepest, and one she endured quietly until the very end. After years of personal and financial turmoil, Doris Day found a new purpose that redefined the latter half of her life. While many stars clung to Hollywood in hopes of reviving their careers, Doris turned her energy toward a cause that had always been close to her heart: animals. From the time she was a young girl in Cincinnati, Doris had loved animals deeply, often rescuing strays and caring for them as though they were part of her family. But after the devastation of discovering her finances ruined in the late 1960s, she poured herself into that passion with an intensity that surprised even those closest to her. What began as personal compassion grew into a lifelong mission that made her one of America's earliest and strongest voices for animal welfare. In 1971, Doris founded the Doris Day Pet Foundation, which later became the Doris Day Animal Foundation. The organization focused on rescuing animals, providing shelter, and promoting adoption, long before such movements were part of mainstream culture. At a time when animal rights were rarely discussed publicly, Doris was raising awareness, using her fame to spotlight the suffering of creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. She helped fund spay and neuter programs, supported animal rescue shelters, and worked tirelessly to change the way Americans thought about their pets, not as possessions, but as companions deserving love and dignity. Her activism didn't stop there. In 1987, Doris established the Doris Day Animal League, a national non-profit dedicated to lobbying for animal welfare legislation. Through the League, she campaigned for stricter laws against animal testing, fought to improve conditions for farm animals, and worked to protect wildlife. These efforts weren't glamorous, and they certainly didn't make headlines the way her films once did, but Doris was relentless. She wrote letters, met with lawmakers, and lent her name to initiatives that might have otherwise gone unnoticed. Her determination proved that she wasn't just lending her fame to a cause, she was working behind the scenes, committed to real change. To the public, Doris Day remained the sunny figure they had always adored. Her image was one of warmth and cheer, the woman who sang "Cue Sera, Sera" with a smile. But hidden beneath that cheerful exterior was a fierce determination, a woman who had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and financial ruin, and who had emerged with a mission larger than herself. She rarely boasted about her work, preferring to let the results speak for themselves. By the time of her death in 2019, her foundations had helped countless animals, and her influence had shifted the way Americans thought about animal welfare. The secret Doris carried was that she was far more than just the entertainer the world knew. Behind the Hollywood smile was a quiet activist, a pioneer who used her fame not for vanity, but for compassion. At a time when few celebrities dared to use their platform for causes outside their careers, Doris Day was already fighting for those without a voice. Her story reminds us that true legacy is not only measured by the roles we play on screen, but by the lives we touch when the cameras are off. At the height of her career, Doris Day was the undisputed queen of Hollywood. Throughout the late 1950s and 1960s, she reigned as the #1 female box office star, year after year, a feat few others could match. Her films were wildly successful, her records sold in the millions, and she was adored across the globe. Yet, in the middle of all this glittering success, Doris herself often felt like a stranger in the world of fame. While many stars thrived on the attention, Doris never grew comfortable with the spotlight. In fact, she quietly longed for something far simpler, an ordinary, private life. Unlike many of her contemporaries, Doris had no interest in Hollywood's endless parties, premieres, and social games. She disliked gossip and avoided the glamorous scene that defined the industry. Where others posed for the cameras and courted publicity, Doris often retreated. Her true happiness wasn't found in flashing bulbs or glitzy events, it was in the quiet company of friends, her beloved animals, and the peaceful routines of home life. This made her an unusual figure in an industry where visibility was often considered the lifeblood of a career. After years of working under the pressure of the studio system and enduring the betrayals in her personal life, Doris eventually made a choice that surprised many. She stepped away from Hollywood almost entirely. She settled in Carmel Valley, California, far from the noise and demands of Los Angeles. There, she found comfort in the simple pleasures of gardening, cooking, and caring for her pets. To the public, it seemed strange that one of the most famous women in the world would live such a quiet life, but to Doris, it was liberation. Still, even in her self-imposed retreat, Hollywood never fully let her go. Reporters sought her out, fans wanted more of her, and the industry continually tried to draw her back. The demands of contracts she hadn't agreed to, financial obligations left behind by Martin Melcher, and the never-ending curiosity of the public meant that Doris could never completely disappear. Even in Carmel, she remained a figure of fascination, her name forever tied to the golden age of Hollywood. The contradiction defined much of Doris's later life. She had achieved everything an actress could hope for: fame, wealth, adoration, yet she often found it burdensome. The Hollywood world that had made her a legend was also the very thing she wanted to escape. Unlike so many of her peers who clung to the limelight, Doris craved the ordinary. She wanted to walk her dogs, spend time with friends, and live without the constant weight of being America's sweetheart. The secret Doris carried was that her heart was never truly in love with fame. She played the role of the star because it was expected of her, but deep down, she dreamed of something far less glamorous. Hollywood pulled her back time and again, but in her soul, Doris Day longed to live the kind of quiet, unremarkable life that most people take for granted. It was this struggle between public adoration and private yearning that shaped the woman behind the legend. In her final years, Doris Day chose a path few would have expected from one of the most famous women in the world. After the heartbreak and disappointments of 4 marriages, she never remarried following her last divorce in 1981. By then, she had endured enough betrayal and heartache to last a lifetime, and she decided she was done seeking love in the traditional sense. Instead, she filled her days with the things that had always brought her the greatest comfort: her animals, her close circle of friends, and the serenity of a life lived far from the chaos of Hollywood. She settled permanently in Carmel Valley, California, a picturesque coastal community known for its beauty and tranquility. To fans who had grown up watching her on the big screen, it seemed almost unimaginable that the woman who had once been America's biggest star was now living quietly in a charming home surrounded by pets. Yet for Doris, this was exactly the life she had always wanted: a life where she could rise each morning without the demands of studios, producers, or the public eye. Her days were spent walking her dogs, tending to her gardens, and continuing her tireless work for animal welfare through her foundation. Despite her reclusiveness, Doris never completely disappeared from the hearts of her admirers. Letters continued to pour in, and fans often made pilgrimages to Carmel, hoping for a glimpse of her. While she valued her privacy, she was also known for her kindness, often stopping to chat with those who happened upon her by chance. Still, she avoided interviews and public appearances, allowing the myth of Doris Day to live on without constant reinforcement. To the world, she remained frozen in time, the smiling, golden-haired star of Pillow Talk or the singer of Sera, Sera. Perhaps the most telling secret of Doris's later years was the way she chose to leave the world. When she passed away in May 2019 at the age of 97, she left behind explicit instructions: no funeral, no memorial, no public spectacle of any kind. There would be no Hollywood send-off, no grand ceremony to honor her career. Instead, she wanted her departure to be as quiet and private as the life she had built for herself in Carmel. Just as she had resisted the glare of fame in her later years, she resisted it in death, asking only for a simple farewell, without fanfare or spectacle. This decision surprised many who had idolized her, but it was deeply in keeping with who Doris Day had become. She was no longer the public sweetheart, but simply a woman who valued peace, privacy, and authenticity above all else. For someone who had lived so much of her life under the scrutiny of the public eye, her final act was one of personal freedom. The woman who had once defined Hollywood glamour chose to close her story quietly, surrounded not by flashing cameras, but by the gentle company of the animals she loved. The secret Doris carried to the end was that she had no interest in leaving behind a final spotlight moment. Her farewell was not to be played out on the stage of Hollywood, but in the stillness of the private life she had always craved. In that choice, she found the peace she had been searching for all along. The image most people hold of Doris Day is one of perfection: the radiant smile, the golden voice, the bubbly charm that seemed untouched by sorrow. She was America's sweetheart, the embodiment of optimism in post-war America, a woman who could light up a screen with effortless warmth. For decades, audiences believed they knew her, and in many ways they did. Her cheerfulness was genuine, her joy infectious. But what the public didn't see was the woman behind the carefully crafted image, the woman who lived with scars of pain, betrayal, and loss. To understand Doris Day fully is to see the contrast between the dazzling Hollywood star and the private, resilient woman who carried secrets of struggle that shaped her life. Her smile was real, but it was also a shield. Behind it lay the story of a teenage girl whose dream of being a dancer was shattered in a single accident. That injury ended one future but opened the door to another, pushing her toward the voice that would make her a household name. It was the first lesson of Doris's life that from pain could come a new path. That theme would repeat itself again and again. She endured 4 marriages, many of them marked by betrayal or abuse, while the world looked at her as the symbol of domestic bliss. She trusted men who misused her money, leaving her nearly penniless at the height of her fame. And she carried the private anguish of losing her only son, Terry Melcher, the one person she loved most fiercely. Each of these blows might have broken another, but Doris kept moving forward, finding ways to endure and even to thrive. Hollywood offered her immense success but also a kind of confinement. She was the #1 female box office star, yet she was often boxed into roles that didn't fully capture her talent. While she longed for more serious recognition, the studios insisted on the cheerful romantic comedies that kept audiences happy. Off-screen, however, Doris was not the eternal party guest of Hollywood. She avoided the social whirl, craved privacy, and dreamed of an ordinary life, far away from the spotlight. When she finally stepped away from the industry, she built that life for herself in Carmel Valley, where the ocean was her backdrop and animals were her constant companions. And it was with animals that she found her greatest second act. Long before celebrity activism was fashionable, Doris became a voice for those who had none. She founded organizations, fought for legislation, and gave countless creatures a chance at life. What some may have dismissed as pet projects were in fact her deepest expression of love and compassion. In rescuing animals, Doris was rescuing herself, finding meaning beyond the applause, beyond the bright lights of Hollywood. In the end, her greatest secret was not tragedy but strength. Doris Day never denied her pain, but she never let it define her. Instead, she transformed it into something larger: laughter that brightened screens around the world, music that lifted spirits for generations, and a legacy of kindness that continues to live through her foundations. Even in death, she chose to reject the spectacle of fame, leaving this world quietly, without ceremony, just as she had chosen to live her final years. The real Doris Day was not the flawless image created by studios, nor the tragic figure hidden behind headlines. She was both an entertainer who gave joy to millions, and a woman who endured heartbreak with dignity. Her life reminds us that even the brightest stars carry shadows, but what matters most is how they face them. Doris Day's true legacy is not just the films, the songs, or the awards. It is the strength to survive, the grace to forgive, and the compassion to care for those who could not care for themselves. That, more than anything, is the story Doris Day left behind, and it will shine far beyond the silver screen.